The last thing Edwin Pierce expected on an overcast Thursday morning was to find himself ankle-deep in milky water, chasing gaudy bits of ceramic across his allotment like a demented fisherman. But there he was, garden trowel clenched between his teeth, polished spectacles fogging over in the steam that rose from soil suddenly saturated by a neighbour's rogue sprinkler. From the adjoining plot came the mechanical hiss-clack of oscillating jets, and somewhere behind it, too muffled to identify, the newcomer's cheerful whistle. Edwin had never been a fan of sprinklers. He preferred the dignity of a steel watering can, the sort that left one hand free to cradle seedlings while the other poured precisely measured arcs of encouragement. Sprinklers, he thought, were incontinent contraptions, flinging water indiscriminately on weeds, compost sacks, and, in this case, a month's worth of raw clay figurines he had laid out to dry. He scooped up a crimson-capped gnome torso, shook mud from its cheery face, and trudged toward the fence that marked the boundary between his tidy domain and the newly leased plot. The fence was little more than 3 slats of weather-blanched pine threaded through chicken wire, and it didn't so much prevent incursions as politely suggest them. Through a gap, Edwin saw a stocky man in a wide-brimmed sun hat, turning the timer dial of a sprinkler staked squarely in the middle of a barren rectangle. "Excuse me," Edwin called. He spat out his trowel and tried to sound cordial. "Your irrigation system is, watering more than your own vegetables." The man straightened and pushed up his hat. "Sorry, I didn't realize it had that kind of range." His accent placed him somewhere north of the Humber, brisk and affable. "I'm Marcus Plimpton, just took over Plot 11. Edwin nodded. "Edwin Pierce, Plot 10. Pleased to meet you. Could you perhaps angle it down a touch? My, merchandise is on the receiving end." Marcus followed Edwin's gesture to the headless ceramic legs sticking out of a puddle. "Are those gnomes?" "Prototype gnomes," Edwin said, resisting the urge to dust off his damp linen trousers. "I sculpt them for independent garden centres, small-batch fantasy figures, if you will." Marcus's grin widened. "You're the famous gnome bloke. My aunt collects your pieces. She's got one with a fishing rod and another dressed like a beef-eater." Edwin felt a wary pride. Few people recognized his work. Most assumed garden ornaments were mass-produced somewhere overseas, not modelled by a bespectacled bachelor in a shed. "Let me shut this thing off." Marcus trotted to the sprinkler, pressed a button, and the jets ceased with a reluctant sigh. "I reckon I owe you a cuppa for the trouble." Edwin opened his mouth to decline. He preferred to pack up soggy clay while it was still salvageable, but Marcus was already rummaging through a cooler. He produced a thermos and 2 enamel mugs, poured steaming tea, and passed one through the fence gap. Edwin took it carefully, mindful of slick fingers. "A right mess, that," Marcus said, nodding at the flooded trench between their plots. "Water's finding the low point. You need a bit of drainage." "I've always relied on the slope," Edwin said. "This is the first time it's been breached." "Well," Marcus said, sipping his tea, "I'll put in a splash guard, promise." He offered a sheepish salute. "Anything else washed astray, let me know." Edwin managed a thin smile. "Thank you." They parted amicably enough. Yet by the time Edwin gathered his ruined gnomes and trudged to his shed, a latent irritation bubbled up. It wasn't so much the water, clay could be refired after all, as the disruption of rhythm. Thursday mornings were for detailing beards, not for exchanging pleasantries with neighbours who wielded irrigation devices like fire hoses. Still, Marcus seemed earnest. Perhaps, Edwin thought as he set the stove for fresh slip, he could learn to tolerate a bit of exuberance. 2 mornings later, Marcus again turned on the sprinkler. Edwin had reinforced his drying rack, raised it on bricks, and pulled a tarpaulin over the vulnerable figurines. He told himself there was nothing to worry about. But as the water built up against the tarp's edge, it overflowed into a shallow depression that ran the length of the bordering path, carving a muddy rivulet. The soil there was unworked, not part of Edwin's cultivated beds, and until that moment he'd never considered what lay beneath. Late in the afternoon, curious, he knelt to inspect the trench. The water had retreated, leaving silt as fine as cocoa, but at the centre glinted something pale. At first he assumed it was a stone. When he brushed aside grime, the object revealed both curvature and a concave interior, shaped unmistakably like a tiny bowl. Edwin pocketed it, washed it in his sink. Porcelain? No. The texture was porous, the colour off-white tinged with ivory. He studied biology textbooks in school, remembered diagrams of skeletal joints. Could it be a fragment of bone? He dismissed the idea. Allotments often held animal remains. Foxes dragged birds under fences. Hedgehogs died in compost heaps. Yet the fragment's edges were sharp, as though broken, not gnawed. That night at home, he placed the shard on his mantel next to an unfinished gnome head, intending to forget it. But forgetfulness proved elusive. His dreams brimmed with watery graves and voiceless faces etched in clay. Saturday dawned bright and windless. Marcus arrived early, whistling again, cheerfully wielding a spade. Edwin assumed the neighbour intended to plant seedlings, but after an hour he realised Marcus was digging a trench along their shared boundary. A preventative measure, no doubt, a channel to direct future overflow away from Plot 10. Edwin felt a flicker of gratitude. "Need a hand?" Edwin called. Marcus waved. "All good, bit of exercise before breakfast." He paused, leaned on the spade. "By the way, I've taken an interest in gnome design. Think you'd mind me looking over your shoulder sometime?" Edwin hesitated. His studio, if one could grant the term to a glorified shed, was a private sanctuary. The smell of kiln, the hush of unhurried concentration. Yet Marcus's enthusiasm warmed him. "Perhaps later," he said diplomatically, "when I'm not elbow deep." "Fair enough," Marcus resumed digging. Edwin returned to his bench and shaped a pair of hands, fingers curled around an invisible lantern. He whistled under his breath, surprised to realise Marcus's tune had infected him. An hour later there came a shout. "Edwin, give us a look at this!" Edwin stepped out. Marcus knelt beside the trench, the spade discarded. In his gloved hand he held an object caked in mud, but recognisably curved. When he rinsed it with water from a can, telltale hollows appeared, eye sockets. "My word," Edwin breathed. "A skull." "Small one," Marcus said. "Child or animal." He rotated it gently, revealing jagged edges where the jaw once attached. "Can't say I fancy leaving it in the soil." Edwin remembered the shard in his mantle. "I found a piece, too, 2 days ago. Didn't put 2 and 2 together." Marcus pursed his lips. "Think we ought to ring the constabulary? If it's human, Edwin finished. Someone's family deserves to know." Marcus cradled the skull in a folded towel, and they carried it to Edwin's shed, set it on the work table beside rows of half-painted figurines. Among the riotous colours and playful poses, the muddy relic appeared indecently solemn. Edwin looked away first. "I'll phone." The police arrived within 20 minutes, 1 patrol car and a forensics van. Uniformed officers cordoned off plots 10 and 11 with tape, while a scene of crime investigator, clad in white overalls, examined the remains. The presence of gnomes seemed to baffle her. She asked Edwin twice to confirm they weren't part of the burial site. He assured her they were no older than spring. Within the hour, soil cores were taken, photographs snapped, and the skull escorted to the van in a sealed evidence box. Marcus, who until then had sustained nervous energy by making tea for everyone, finally slumped on an upturned bucket. "Guess I've flooded your plot for good," he said. Edwin managed a dry chuckle. "At least we know why the drainage was poor." Then, quieter. "You all right?" "Bit shaken," Marcus admitted. "Strange, isn't it? 1 minute you're digging a vegetable bed, next you've uncovered, what, someone's tragedy." Edwin stared at the yellow police tape fluttering like cautionary bunting between staking posts. His mind conjured images. A clandestine burial at night, footsteps soft in loose earth, perhaps the perpetrator choosing the allotment because turnover was high and no one would dig too deep. "I sculpt faces," Edwin said suddenly. "I spend hours considering cheekbones, eyelids, to meet a real skull." He shook himself as though to scatter morbid dust. Marcus cleared his throat. "You should probably get back to your work. Distract yourself." But Edwin found little solace in clay that afternoon. Each gnome's grin felt brittle, as if hiding secrets behind frosted laughter. At dusk he locked the shed, surprised how reluctant he was to leave the taped-off garden. Something tugged at him. A responsibility, a tether formed the moment bone met daylight. Detective Sergeant Lillian Kerr called Edwin the next evening. The remains were human, she confirmed, likely female, aged mid-teens to early 20s, deceased approximately 30 years. No dental match yet, DNA analysis underway. They were treating it as suspicious pending further evidence. She thanked Edwin and Marcus for their diligence and requested they refrain from media contact. Afterwards, Edwin pored over local history forums, searching for missing persons cases from the late 80s. Several names surfaced, but one captured his attention. Alice Browning, age 17, vanished June 1989 after leaving a part-time job at the Rose and Crown pub, last seen walking toward the bus stop near Richmond Road. The allotments abutted Richmond Road. He printed Alice's photograph, black and white, a girl with blunt fringe and earnest eyes, wearing a denim jacket he recognized from retro boutiques. He propped it in his workshop, beneath the lamp that illuminated his sculptures. That night he dreamed of her again, although again suggested earlier dreams he could not recall. She stood among rows of gnomes, each one holding lanterns, yet the light did not reach her. She touched a finger to her lips in warning. Days passed while forensic teams sifted soil. Edwin's routine fractured. He couldn't access his shed during police hours, so he took to sketching at his dining table. Pen strokes birthed a new figure, taller than a typical gnome, slender, wearing a denim jacket stylized to suggest chainmail. The figure's eyes, under a canopy of blunt fringe, carried solemnity unheard of among his whimsical creations. Late Wednesday afternoon, D.S. Kerr visited Edwin's cottage. She had an unhurried manner, perhaps cultivated to calm witnesses. They sat with tea and Jaffa cakes among sketches. "You've heard about the missing local girl," she said. Her gaze settled on the sketch atop the pile. "Alice Browning." "Yes," Edwin admitted. "I researched." "Understandable," Kerr said. "Did you know her?" He shook his head. In 1989 he had been 9, living in Kent, far from this town. Kerr folded her hands. We've begun interviewing allotment holders who rented plots back then. Records are patchy. I was hoping you might recall any older tenants who still potter about. Edwin offered names. Mr. Dalrymple of Plot 2, Mrs. Singh of Plot 5. Kerr scribbled them. Edwin summoned courage. Detective, may I ask, was she buried whole? Kerr's eyes narrowed. Why? I found a bone fragment earlier in the week, Edwin said, explaining about the small bowl-like piece. The skull surfaced in Marcus's trench, yet the rest of the body. We've recovered partial remains, Kerr said carefully. The pelvis and several ribs are missing. Swept away by years of gardening, perhaps? Perhaps, she said, non-committal. Edwin sensed she was withholding. He didn't press. When she left, he walked to the mantel, studied the bone fragment resting there. It seemed to weigh more than its mass allowed. Perhaps he should hand it over. Yet a stubborn part of him resisted, as though giving it up would sever his link to Alice, leave the investigation to faceless institutions. That night he wrapped the fragment in soft cloth, slipped it into his pocket. Thursday dawned restless. Police had finished cordoning off. Plots were free to use. Marcus arrived, subdued, carrying seedlings. Edwin watched him transplant young courgettes with tender precision, as though fearing to disturb ghosts. Edwin joined him. How's it feel? Like gardening at a gravesite, Marcus said. Technically, we all garden atop graves, Edwin replied. Centuries of life beneath our feet. Not the same. No. Edwin crouched, drew the cloth bundle from his pocket. I never turned this in, he confessed, unwrapping the fragment. Seemed wrong to keep it. Marcus's eyes widened. You'd better. I will. Just wanted to show you first. Tell you I've been thinking. Edwin inhaled. Someone buried her close to the boundary. 30 years later, our sprinkler and trench expose her skull. But why was the rest elsewhere? Maybe whoever buried her was interrupted, Marcus ventured. Or perhaps, Edwin said slowly, the skull wasn't buried at all. Perhaps it was moved later, inadvertently, by gardeners digging compost pits, shifting soil across boundaries. Marcus frowned toward his raised bed. So bits of her could be anywhere. Exactly. Edwin scanned the allotments. What if more remains rest under existing structures, sheds, paving stones? Marcus shivered in the warm air. We'd better tell Detective Kerr your theory. They did. Kerr listened, jotted notes, promised to arrange ground-penetrating radar. The following week, electricians arrived with radar equipment mounted on a dolly. They rolled it along grid lines, beeping each time anomalies appeared. Among them, at the southwest corner of Edwin's shed, the device screeched. Investigators marked the site, and soon a forensic anthropologist supervised careful troweling. Edwin watched from the path, nerves taut. 10 centimeters down, the archaeologist uncovered vertebrae. Another section revealed ribs fused with clay, and finally the missing pelvis. Curled within the curve of hip bones lay an object that made even the steely forensic techs gasp. A ceramic figure, discolored by soil but unmistakable. A gnome, one of Edwin's earliest designs from 5 years ago, the kind he had gifted to fellow gardeners as a gesture of goodwill. Edwin stepped forward. That's mine. Kerr held out a gloved hand to stop him. Sir, please remain behind the line. But that gnome, how did it get under my shed? I built this 2 summers ago. The anthropologist, still kneeling, extracted the figurine. Its hat was cracked, nose chipped, but logo initials, EP, were visible at the base. Could someone have placed it there intentionally? Kerr asked. Edwin's mind raced. When constructing the shed, he'd levelled the ground, laying paving slabs on compacted hard core. He had not dug deep enough to reach bones. The gnome must have been there before he arrived. Whoever buried the body may have used an ornament to mark the site, he suggested. Whose gnome was it before you? Kerr asked. Edwin searched memory. I gave a gnome like that to Mr. Dalrymple. Kerr's eyebrows rose. The same man still gardening plot 2? Yes, thank you. She turned to her team. Let's wrap for today. Edwin watched as evidence was tagged and boxed. He felt momentarily weightless, not with relief, but with the realization the mystery had outgrown him. 2 days later, Kerr requested Edwin come to the station for a statement. He sat opposite her in a small interview room, the table's laminate edge rubbed smooth by countless anxious thumbs. We've arrested Frederick Dalrymple, Kerr said. We believe he killed Alice Browning. We'll present evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service in due course. Edwin swallowed. What evidence? Alice worked at his pub. He was the manager then. Kerr flipped open a file. A witness once saw them arguing outside the pub the week she disappeared. The gnome under your shed appears to have been placed atop the grave as a keepsake or trophy. Dalrymple admits you gifted it to him, but denies burying it. She closed the file. More compelling is the timeline. He rented both Plot 10 and 11 back in '89, consolidated them into one large area. When tenancy lapsed, council split them again. Your shed sits where his potting bench once did. Edwin felt faint. I've been sculpting above her all this time. Kerr's voice softened. You uncovered her. Because of your craft, your vigilance, Alice's family can finally mourn properly. He nodded, staring at his hands. Clay still lodged under fingernails. Weeks later, after press headlines subsided and police tape came down for good, Edwin found himself alone at the allotment. The hole near his shed had been filled, levelled with topsoil. He planted lavender there, pale purple spikes dancing in breeze. Marcus appeared, carrying a seed tray. Mind if I borrow your trowel? Edwin handed it over. How are you holding up? Better, Marcus said. Feels good to watch things grow again. Edwin agreed. He saw life returned to normalcy, or its approximation. Yet each clink of spade against soil carried resonance, a reminder of hidden histories. That evening he retired to his shed. A new line of gnomes waited in bisque form. He selected the one modelled after Alice, a tall, slender guardian with lantern raised. He painted denim blues, soft eyes, and on the base inscribed AB 1989. He made 12 replicas and wrapped them carefully. At dawn he distributed them around the allotment perimeter, 1 per plot, silent sentinels facing inward. No explanatory note, just presence. Gardeners arriving later found them nestled among beans and marigolds. Some laughed, some teared up. All understood. When he reached Marcus's plot, Edwin planted the final figure near the trench that began it all. Water from Marcus's now-tamed sprinkler arced overhead, catching sunlight, casting rainbows upon denim and clay. Edwin placed his palms into damp earth, feeling coolness, weight, possibility. Above ground, gnomes stood watch. Below, seeds germinated in darkness. Between them straddled the fragile realm of human endeavour. Sculptor's hands, neighbour's conscience, bones returned to daylight so that living could proceed. As Edwin locked the shed, a breeze rustled lavender. In the hush that followed, he imagined footsteps no longer pleading, but moving onward, light and certain, along a garden path that led, finally, home.